If you're struggling to start or grow your photography business, or just want to know what it takes to be a professional nature and wildlife photographer in 2022, you're in the right place. Today's guest is Lisa Langell, who's going to talk about the nuts and bolts of the photography business. Welcome, Lisa.
Hey, thank you, Kirby. I appreciate being here today. It's a great day to talk about photography.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you working me into your life. I know it's a busy one.
Well, I'm sure we're both busy. It's all good. Glad to do it.
So, why don't we start with telling everyone about your journey through the business of photography? I know that's an interesting one.
Yeah, and it certainly didn't start out, I didn't start out as a photographer, working for myself, but back when I was about 8 years old, I got started in bird watching. My great aunt Joe, who passed at 102, and we were good friends. I loved her dearly. She's the one that got me started into photography, and well, actually more so into bird watching, which then was the impetus for me to get started with photography. So I had a little point and shoot camera for many years, a little Canon, or excuse me, Kodak Instamatic with the little blue bulb at the top. And I used that up until, I was around maybe 13, and I got a Canon A1 35 millimeter. And it was then when I had that camera and a lens that was way too short to photograph birds that I went to Point Pelee, Ontario, Canada, which is a great flyway for bird watching in the spring. I went there and I remember doing it for birding, and I just brought the camera along, but I would see all these photographers there with these really long lenses. They'd be carrying them in wagons sometimes. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I want to do that. Whatever it takes, I want to do that. So that really got me started even more, not just in photography. I took pictures as a kid, but really focusing in on the nature and wildlife photography. And that became a passion of mine. I was a yearbook editor in high school and photographer. So I did a variety of photography things then. And photography even carried me through college and graduate school, where I did it for fun, kind of as an escape. Took a couple of dark room classes and such. And then afterwards, I became a psychologist. And during that time, when I was putting myself through college, and even when I was in high school, I also worked as a floral designer. And so I kind of had a lot of design and creativity in my blood. And so I took pictures, like I said, through college and graduate school. I worked as a psychologist for many years, working with kids with learning disabilities and figuring out how they learn and what techniques they need to utilize, or teachers need to utilize, in order to help them maximize their learning. And I ended up consulting around the country and even around the world on those techniques. Got pretty well known for what I did. But the cool thing was, is whenever I would travel on the road to go somewhere, almost always I would grab my camera. So it was a neat way after I was done consulting for the day to maybe sneak out in the evening hours and take a picture or two of wherever I was at. And my pictures and my photography kept improving and growing. And people started to say, oh, you should start your own business doing that. And so eventually I did. In late 2010, early 2011, I started Langell Photography. And I wish I would have known so many things. I made so many mistakes in the early days. And hey, we all make mistakes, but there are a lot of things and a lot of misconceptions about the business that I wished I would have known. So I'm excited to talk about that today, because hopefully I can, you know, help people avoid some of those missteps, and take some of the right steps first if they're thinking about a business in wildlife and nature photography. But that was my journey. And then by 2015, I ended up having so much photography work that I had to transition from kind of part-time side hustle to full-time position. And it was tough. There was not a lot of money to begin with. And, I had to really rely on my grit and stamina to do it, but I did it, and I have not regretted it one bit. And I love doing it full time today. And I've been doing that since 2015. And there's a lot of cool things in the future. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, Kirby.
Okay. Sounds like a pretty good one to me. So you've got kind of a unique perspective on the business of photography and divide the various genres into buckets. Talk about that and explain how that works.
Yeah, so Kirby, I'm actually going to share my screen for a minute and give people a little idea about what I'm talking about with those buckets and kind of how I separate different types of photography, and kind of how I've differentiated myself. And I just say this: everybody's got their own journey. Doesn't mean you need to copy what I do. It probably isn't going to work for other people because I'm not you and you're not me. And you know, your own style is so important in all of this. But one of the things that I realized when I was working earlier on in my business, both part time and then early on full time, is I would get invited to exhibit at galleries, and people are like, "Your wildlife work is so beautiful." And I would send in these traditional images, and people would love them. They'd celebrate them, take a look at them, enjoy them, like this picture of a bear with a salmon in its mouth. I mean, that's kind of one of the more iconic shots that people want to get when they're a wildlife photographer. And I would print out all these different types of great wildlife photography, things that have won awards for me, things that have been published in magazines, stuff that people really, really enjoyed. And I would print my best stuff, and it costs a lot. If you've never done a gallery, it costs a lot of money to print things up in high quality, larger formats, and to exhibit in the gallery. Usually it's approximately a 50-50 split with the gallery. So when you do sell things, it's not just you walk away with the profit. So you have to really think about your pricing very carefully. So I would print, lots of neat stuff. Some of these are included in those galleries. Some of them are just extra traditional wildlife photography and nature photography shots. But I'm giving you an idea of what I would print. And people would come in and they would ooh and ah and love it. I mean, I was doing galleries in California and in Phoenix and a couple of other places outside of the area, and everybody would stop and stare and ooh and on. It would draw in crowds. But the problem is when I would hopefully think that they would want to sell it. And so, put something like that on the wall. It's a great image, but the problem is nobody saw that as working in their living room. It just didn't work. And so all these images that we would shoot using all these very um, straightforward and traditional rules around photography and nature photography that we've all been trained on. If you've taken any classes or been a part of camera clubs or competitions or whatnot, there's kind of a general set of rules around nature photography of what you should do and what you shouldn't do, how big things need to be, how in the frame, all kinds of different rules. And these kinds of pictures, I would hang them on the wall. I'm like, they've met all the rules. They're, beautiful shots, tack sharp, action, whatever. People would love them, but they wouldn't take them home. It wouldn't work when it came to closing the sale. And so there's some things that I learned as we did all of this, and as I kind of spent a lot of money in the front end that I wish I wouldn't have done. And that is that this simply wasn't working the majority of the time. I mean, certainly there were some people that would do it, but when I look at trends, that was my whole business in psychology, was looking at data and trends and analyzing trends and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work based upon those trends. But all these types of images were great, but they weren't selling in interiors. And so it started to really feel deflating to me because, I'm thinking, well, I know how to photograph, but nobody wants this stuff. And I'm so confused because it's won awards and this and that. And what I realized over time is that there's more than one style of photography. And of course, everybody knows that, but I really had to put my design hat back on. So I was a floral designer for 15 years, and I worked with, in interiors. I worked with interior designers, and I would design high-end pieces for multi-million dollar homes back where I used to live in Michigan. And I learned a lot from that. I learned about color and placement and size and position and balance and all these different things. Some of it was intuitive, some of it was hard learned from learning from others. But I realized that all of these pictures really weren't designed for an interior. They were designed, whether I realized it or not, for a magazine or a calendar. And there's very specific criteria for that. And so, what I wanted to mention in that, and it's going to lead into some of the discussion today, is about classic nature photography. It really fits into a bucket. And so I want you to be thinking about that, but I'm going to put those types of images today into a bucket because those rules, and I don't mean a trash bucket, just we're going to contain it to this style of photography. Those rules are very different from often the set of rules, and there are rules. They're a little more loose, but there are rules around what a client will purchase for a home or office or commercial space, and even those differ among one another. But there's lots of other places that our photography lives other than magazines and calendars and in competitions. And yet those are the rules that kind of take over everything in most nature photography, clubs, competitions, magazines, and so forth. And the reason being is there's a magazine footprint and it's, let's say, 9 by 12. And if your image doesn't work for that size footprint, there's rules for that, and there's rules that say some things don't work for that. People used to think it was just bad, and the problem is it may not have been bad. It was just bad for that particular set of requirements. But if you start looking more broadly, we can start to get into other buckets. So, calendars and magazines and photo contests kind of all fit in that traditional nature photography bucket. But if we start looking at requirements for advertising and what kind of images are needed for those, or gift products, or decorative art, under which it's kind of a big umbrella under which fine art photography would also live, it opens up a lot of doors, but there's very different rules for how these things are done and what is required of each of those things. And there's so much more, right? Social media, the size and the style of image that captures someone's attention in social media, a little square image, for example, in some places, very different from a banner, very different from a gift product. But we don't ever talk about those rules. And so that's kind of where I like to live, in this other area, not just the traditional stuff, but live in this area too.
Good. Yeah, that helps. And as I said, that's kind of a unique viewpoint. Most of us grew up with that nature photography set of rules, as you said, and
Yeah.
so yeah. And I've had some of the same experiences you have. That doesn't work in the if you're trying to sell prints or whatever.
Yeah, it just doesn't. And it's a hard lesson to learn because I don't know about you, but I just cleaned out storage not that long ago and found, old prints that I had and, had for some galleries. I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars by the time you really do a substantial gallery. I'm not talking about a wall in a gallery where you may have 4 or 5 pieces. Like if you're printing 30 pieces, 40 pieces for a gallery, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of expense and it's a lot of, dead money sitting in your closet if they don't sell. So yeah, hard lessons.
Expensive inventory.
Yes, it is.
So one of the buckets, I guess you could say, was for a lot of nature and wildlife photographers is workshops.
Hmm.
Is that the only way or the best way to make it?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I do teach workshops. It's certainly not the only income stream that I have. Um, but I would say this: if someone is looking at starting a business, workshops can certainly be a potentially good income. What it requires is probably more than what many people realize. I've learned so much over the years in doing them. I've been doing them for 10 or more years. And as a side note, before that, I taught workshops for my other industry for 15 or 16 years. And so there was a lot of learning that I had there. And I also specialize in teaching and instruction as part of my educational psychology background. So I have a really good understanding of teaching pedagogy and best practices around teaching. And that's something that I've heard from other clients of mine, that there might be a great photographer out there and you go on his or her workshop, but the instruction is really lacking. And that may be the case. Maybe they advertise it as just a photo tour and there is no instruction. But if you're expecting instruction, that's been something that's been lacking. So that's something I really shine at and I love to do. I've loved to teach since I had a basement with a chalkboard and stuffed animals and a few desks in my, home. I've been doing that since I was a kid. It's kind of in my blood. But Yeah, so that's an option, but I think it really takes a good instructor to do it well. And then you've got so many other variables to putting together those workshops and things. You have to be kind of really knowledgeable in a lot of different things, or it can go wrong quickly. So that's one option, but there's more income streams than that. But it is something that a lot of people turn to. But I think anymore people are getting pickier and pickier about what they're choosing to purchase, and how that's being conducted, especially post COVID. Who's the responsible ones? Who are the ones that are not so responsible in, yes, teaching, but everything else as well in putting together an event?
Yeah, it's a lot of work and a lot of upfront work that may not pay off if nobody decides to sign up for it.
Exactly, exactly. And you could be left on the hook for literally tens and twenties and more thousands of dollars if you're not really careful about how you create it. Because, if I want to do a tour in Alaska, which I do every summer, multiple ones, my vendors expect, I mean, I'm mailing off checks for 30, 40, $50,000 or more, and at a time, and often there's multiple payments, and they don't give their money back if you don't sell it out, because that's their time that they've booked. So to really be careful about it. And I don't think a lot of people realize the upfront investment that it takes to do some of these workshops and do them well.
And you also have to kind of build some kind of a reputation that such that people will want to go on a workshop with you no matter where it is.
Y- Yeah, you're so right, Kirby. And one thing I didn't realize when I first started, so I started doing and this is what I would recommend to anybody that wants to get started with this, is start local. And so I did. My first classes and things were working with state parks, working with local, botanical gardens and arboretums and things like that, local agencies that might want you to teach for them, and that's what I did. And those classes might have been, granted, this is 10, 15 years ago, 30 to $50 a piece, not very much. And usually it was a revenue split because you're using their facility, and you either got to pay them outright or split the profits. So there wasn't a lot of money in it in the beginning, but it was a great way to get to know people and also kind of get your feet wet. But yeah, and what I didn't realize, there's a very interesting story about this. I won't get into all the details now, but my first big workshop was taught in Alaska, and it was under really unique circumstances that I ended up doing that. Most people don't start like that. But I taught in Alaska, and at first I had one person on my tour. This is, 10 years ago or so. I had one person, and I was like, gosh, there's got to be more than one person that wants to go to Alaska with me and learn. And what I realized is it wasn't so much that I wasn't a good photographer, or I wasn't a good instructor, or maybe even that my name wasn't out there enough. I mean, gradually you grow, but it was that I was a new person on the scene, and people were spending thousands of dollars to do these workshops. They didn't know if I'd be there. If they booked a year in advance, they didn't have any guarantee that I would be there next year. I might have faded away into the universe between now and then. And people want to trust that there's some longevity in your business. And I think that is equally as important as who you are, how you teach, or where the itinerary is taking people. It's that trust, and that didn't occur to me right away, but it does now, and it's something you really have to keep up. You've got to always do what's in the best interest, certainly of your business and your customers. And you come last sometimes, and not everybody's willing to accept that. Like, you got to do the right thing consistently.
Sure. Yeah. And what other business skills does it take to be a successful professional wildlife photographer, would you say?
That's such a great question. And I'll say this: you don't have to have a master's degree in business, an MBA, to do this. But so from lessons learned, and keep in mind, I worked as a psychologist, but I also worked for a large corporation, and I worked for two startups. So literally, I was startup, employee number three. I was excuse me, business development officer, and I learned so many things about business, just good business acumen, practices, skill sets to have that really helped me. I would say, in my experience in talking with other small business owners or ones that want to start up, things that you really need to do up front. Like, everyone wants to jump on the, I'm going to get a website going and I'm going to sell some photos. I would say hold off on that. And the number one question before you start investing in anything is, do you understand your market? um, just because you're a good photographer doesn't mean that there's a market for that work where you plan on opening up your business, or even if you do it online. I had a gentleman email me pictures, and I have several people do it, email me pictures a while back, and they were of some landscapes in Pennsylvania. They were okay. There was nothing super striking about them. I think, he probably needed some time to grow in his skill set. But the first thing he wanted to do was, talk to me about setting up a website and getting his pictures out there. And I said, before you even do that, do you know you have a viable market? Have you asked 50 people if they would purchase that for any price, $10, $100? Would that be something that they would put in their home? And I said, and if they get a polite yes, but they really wouldn't, or you could do an anonymous survey, put some images up there and go, hey, how many people would buy this, and just send it to 50 people and get yeses and nos anonymously. Like, people don't understand their market, and they keep trying to jump into a market without understanding it. And I would say, number one thing, who are you selling to? If you can't describe that person and you can't demonstrate that there's a demand, or you don't know, it's too early to start your business. You have to really understand those things, or you're going to waste a lot of time and money and be upset.
Yes.
Speaking from experience, right? It's
Yes.
taken me a while to carve this out. I didn't say I started my business properly. I'm just telling you what I learned along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Understand. So you succeeded as a fine art, nature, and wildlife photographer. What is that, and how does it differ from your traditional nature and wildlife photography that we've talked about up till now?
Yeah, it's funny. I met a good friend for lunch today, and she's a photographer too, and we were talking about this exact thing. And um, I think for me, it goes back to the buckets and understanding where you are. So when I started with my photography, the goal was to get, whatever this means, a good image. And, yes, I've, won some contests and placed high in them and gotten publications and those types of thing. That's great. Anymore, I don't necessarily, I don't want to say I don't care, but it is not a high priority for me to enter contests and win competitions. It takes a lot of dedication and focus to do that. And I'd rather focus on some other things that are more meaningful to me. So, things that I like to do now, certainly I'll do the traditional nature photography, like what we talked about. But I really also like to combine my artistic style. Many people don't know, and I don't have time to do it now, but I used to paint birds a lot. I used to be a floral designer. Um, Artist. I used to draw a lot when I was younger, and those kinds of things. I love to marry the two in photography. And I just like to find things that are a little bit more artistically expressive and emotionally evocative. And I also like to design things that, for me and my clients, they sell, they like what I do. And that's kind of where I like to spend my time now, in honing my craft. And I still barely have enough time to do that, but that's where I really like to spend my time. But it's not to say that other things are wrong. And some people may completely disagree with me about my style, but you've got to really stay true to you, and, your taste and style. And I just kind of pick my lane. And luckily, it's not a lane that everybody's in, which is another business strategy too, but it's one I actually really love. So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
So I know you've got a lot of irons in the fire. Do you do all this by yourself, or do you have staff, or how does that work?
So I have a job that requires 20 staff, and I have myself. Plus, I contract out with another small company to do some very small things for me. So it might be handling my schedule to schedule webinars. It's very discrete tasks, and so I do a little bit of that, and then occasionally I'll contract out some other work. Um, but yeah, most of it is myself. I would say 95, 98% of it is me. It's hard work. And I'm not saying that, to play victim. It's just, you have to be diligent. You have to be on top of it. There's often many more balls in the air than what you can juggle, but you got to try to still do it. And the career as a photographer is one where you'd think you get to shoot a whole lot more than you did when you worked full time doing whatever else. And in reality, you get to shoot far less. That said, I get to still do a lot of things that I love. I love teaching. I love when I get those moments. I can experiment. I love going out into the field, just by myself, no one around, and just so I can have my headspace in order to really create and try to get inspired. And so when I do get out there and do that, those moments are really precious to me. And you've got to maximize your time, right? And so thinking in different ways and being prepared when you go out to, I don't want to say have an agenda, but you have to be very open minded. You can't say, well, I'm going to go out today and hope to photograph blue herons. Like, you have to go out and look at what nature's giving you and also have a plan in mind for what you need, or what you want to augment, or what your goal is for that day. So I guess you could think of it as projects in some ways, but uh, I like to come back with something I can work with. And so that's how I approach it.
Everybody likes to talk about gear, so let's talk a few minutes about what gear you use and what you recommend for nature and wildlife photography.
Yeah, good question. So what I personally use is I have a Canon R5, which is a mirrorless camera. I acquired that last year. I also have a Canon 5D Mark IV, and then I have an older 7D Mark II. I really feel that the R5, and I don't get paid to say this, but I really feel like the R5 has definitely been an upgrade. And I don't mean it financially. I mean, literally, the things you can do with it, you can't do in previous models. The eye tracking is one of the most phenomenal things, and multiple mirrorless cameras have that now, but it's just one of the most phenomenal things, coming up over the years from using a 35 millimeter film manual focus camera to the eye tracking is sort of mind boggling in my opinion. But it's really been an upgrade. Some of these other cameras that I've had, 7D from 40D to 7D to 7D Mark II, 5D Mark IV, and now the R5. Those have all been improvements, but the R5, I really feel like this is a real upgrade. It's been a joy to use. That said, I don't think everybody needs the latest and greatest gear. And I really think if you can focus on understanding, no matter what camera you have, I don't care if it's an iPhone or a 40-year-old camera, whatever, really understanding that camera's strengths and limitations, as well as the lens you put on it and its strengths and limitations, and then operating in that lane with what that camera can do is really going to be a good thing for you. And then learning a lot about photography as a whole, so you can kind of cover up shortcomings in certain cameras or lenses and kind of know where the boundaries are, push the boundaries a little bit. But I don't think everybody needs to have the latest and greatest thing to execute great photography. I know plenty of people that have brand new gear and have no idea how to use it and no creative vision for what to do with it. So I would say that lens wise, I'm a Tamron ambassador, but I came by it very honestly and kind of serendipitously. Excuse me. I was testing out the Tamron 150 to 600 G2 and the Sigma Contemporary side by side for about 2 months, because I had clients that were asking me, Lisa, which one should I pick? And I had no idea. I'd never shot with either of them. I had a Canon 500 millimeter f4 prime, and most of those people were saying, "Well, yeah, I can't afford a $12,000 lens plus to go to Alaska with you or wherever I go." So I tested these lenses out. I borrowed them from a camera store who loaned them to me for 2 months and tested them out. And the camera store owner called me and he said, "Hey," it was about 2 months later. He says, "Hey, are you done testing those lenses yet?" And I said, "I'm actually taking this Sigma out for the last time today." I said, "I've kind of given them both a good run." I said, "I'm leaning a little more towards Tamron, and that's because of my personal shooting style. And I do a lot of birds in flight, and the particular camera and how it was working with it, that seemed to work better." And very long story short, he says, "So you're sure, Tamron?" I go, "I'm pretty darn sure." I said, "But I'm taking the Sigma out for one more run." So anyway, at the end of the day, the Tamron I just still felt was the better camera for me and my camera and my shooting style. Nothing against Sigma. But anyhow, that worked better for me. And he contacted me. He goes, "Well, I'm sitting here with the director of marketing for Tamron USA, and they're looking for a field female wildlife photographer to be an ambassador. And I wanted to recommend you, but I didn't want to do that if you like Sigma more." And so it was a very honest response from me and from him. And that relationship has been phenomenal. And I absolutely adore their gear. So high votes for Tamron gear. That it's really exceptional, and it's just been a great experience. And then I used Photo Pro, which is Photopro, Photo Pro Eagle Series tripod. There's more information about that on my website, but that is the best tripod I have ever used for so many reasons. So that's kind of my setup, and I'm thrilled with it. So
Okay. Sounds good. I mean, the secret is finding a camera and gear that works for you, and
yes,
everybody has their favorites, of course.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
I think one of the other keys is that not only do you have to have certain gear, but you have to know how to use it, and it has to be part of your body almost if you want to be successful in things like moving wildlife, flying birds, and that sort of thing.
yes. And I think one of the things that if I could encourage everybody, I teach a lot of different things, but I could, and I'm just going to make up something for a minute. I could advertise a class on butterfly photography or motorcycle photography or portraits or, bears, whatever. Um, but it's not that there's all these unique skills to photograph butterflies that necessarily different from bears. There may be a little bit, uh, or people, and there's again a little bit of a difference. But the one single thing that I consistently run into is that people don't understand how to shoot with manual settings or why or what that would mean for them. And so, if anything, if everybody could get a better handle on that, like I teach it all the time, but if there are people that could get a better handle on that, it opens the door to everything for you. So it isn't that butterfly photography is a whole separate skill set from bird photography, from bears, from portraits, from motorcycles, and whatever. There is some difference, but at its core is that basic knowledge. And I think people struggle a lot with that. And there's some easy ways to learn it and some harder ways. And I aim to make it easy, but it's such an important thing. It's like the key that unlocks the whole entire uh, world of photography for you if you can learn how to do that, assuming you're shooting with a DSLR or mirrorless and not a cell phone or something like that. But even then, understanding manual settings, there are some cell phone apps that will allow you to do that. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, we've talked a lot about the differences between conventional, if you will, nature and wildlife photography and fine art wildlife photography. So let's take a look at some of your photos and kind of
Yeah,
demonstrate some of that. So I'm
I've
gonna,
got some right behind me on my screen.
yeah, I noticed. Start with this one. This is one of my favorites of the ones you sent me.
Aw. Yeah, this is fun. This was from just this past summer in Alaska with the North Pacific otters. These are just the sea otters are so adorable and so playful. And where I take people to photograph, there's two different places that I'll take people to photograph the otter by boat, by private boat. And this particular one, there happens to typically be an otter nursery. So a lot of the females will bring their little baby otters, the little cubs, to this area, and they kind of it works as a safety net. But this is done in high key style, which was one of my favorite styles to shoot, where you get these very light, bright, ethereal kind of backgrounds and foregrounds, and it's just one of my favorite things. So I love shooting in high key, and if I could have anything, any wish at all, I live in Arizona and most days are sunny and you really need kind of gloomy days to do hiking. I just wish we had more gloomy days. I need to live in like Seattle or Alaska. But anyhow, that's where this is from.
Okay. Yeah, there's great expressions both on the mom and the baby, and they're looking right at you. So
Yeah.
it's a great shot.
It's so neat because we turn off the engine in the boat and the where we are is kind of just really calm water, just little ripples. And so they're so curious and they will cautiously approach the boat so you can get some really nice shots without being that far away from them, and then the little babies just rest on their mom's tummies, and it's just so much fun to watch them. They are just awesome. And most people don't know this, but otters do make noise. So if the baby dives, like some of them get a little older and they dive, and mom can't find the baby, like maybe it's popped up out of view, they will actually call. It kind of sounds like a loud kind of a high pitched bark, but they will call to the babies if they can't find them. So it's kind of a haunting sound, and you're hoping they reunite, every single time that
Right.
some creature didn't get them underneath, but it's an amazing thing to watch.
The detail that you have in this is amazing too. Was this with the R5?
Yes, it was. Yeah, the R5 and the Tamron 150 to 600 with the the Canon adapter. So the 150 to 600 G2, and then that Canon adapter that's like $100 that you can use on the mirrorless. And that's been a phenomenal combination for me.
Yeah, looks like it. This is another one I liked really well. It's lots of bear pictures out there, including mine, but this is a pretty unique one.
It is this, if you can imagine, this is also in Alaska. I've been to Alaska 48 times and counting. I'm actually expanding quite a bit what I'm doing up there, offering a lot more options throughout the summer. It is like home away from home for me. But this bear is part of a little trip that we do where I take people in a float plane. We land in a glacier fed lake about half hour away, and it's an area that has a higher bear density. And so this particular bear was walking around on a floating island out there. They do have those floating islands that are kind of grassy and they're spongy, and they're suspended in the water. And in the early spring, they will actually be out looking for salmon, but before the salmon run has ever hit, they're actually looking for last year's salmon that have floated to the bottom and frozen over winter, and they will dig those up and use those. So they're waiting for the new salmon run to come in, and sometimes there's new salmon as well. But this guy was just swimming towards the boat and feeling along the bottom of the water. It's a little bit over their heads, so they kind of on their tippy toes, but he was swimming towards the boat, and we're in a flat bottom boat, and you just get these fantastic shots, and you're really safe because they can't lunge at you. They're over their head in water. I mean, they could swim, but we can motor out of there faster than they could ever get to us. So it's a really neat opportunity. And there's just a few of us in the boat. It's a really cool moment, and I love that he was just eye to eye with me. So that was
Yeah,
fun.
exactly. Is this at Lake Clark or?
It's in the Lake Clark Wilderness area. So there's Lake Clark National Park. We go there too for my bear extensions. But this is in Lake Clark Wilderness, which is another adjacent piece of property, but not technically part of the national park. It's national wilderness.
Okay. A neat cloud formation. That looks like something that might come over the Sierras, but I'm guessing this was somewhere else.
Yeah, this was in Yellowstone, actually, Yellowstone National Park,
Uh,
right by Lake Yellowstone, or is it Yellowstone Lake? I always get the order wrong, but right near there. And I was actually somewhere else in the park, and all of a sudden the kind of weather started to change, and I was actually hustling to get back to my trailer, my camper, which was right near Yellowstone Lake and or Lake Yellowstone, and I couldn't help but want to photograph the storm. So I jumped out of my car. I didn't even have time to get my tripod up. And I was photographing like these beautiful mammatus clouds and lightning. But this was one of those clouds that formed. And it was cool on its own. But I absolutely loved all these dead trees in silhouette. It was just the coolest moment. So that was one of those just had to be there moments. And it was fleeting. It only lasted, I would say, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then it all changed, and it was all super doom and gloom, and lightning and crashing, and a completely different scene. But this was a cool moment to be there.
yeah, I guess so. So, any of these three uh, photos that people would want to put on their wall, do you think?
Good question. So of the three, I think well, here's what I think the bear in its current state would probably be the least likely to go on a wall. Most people don't want a huge headshot if we blew it up to go over a living room, or over your headboard in your bedroom. People don't typically want that much vivid color and that much intensity in a room that's designed to be more relaxing. I could see it a little bit more maybe in an office, depending on everything else in that office color scheme, or lack of color scheme, what the overall design is, and so forth, maybe. But I think that's the least likely of the three. The most likely might be the otter because it's a very simple color palette, and it's done in high key, which minimizes that color palette and tends to go better in different homes. Again, it just depends on the design. I mean, some people may not want to otter on their wall at all, but the color palette lends itself better. This landscape lends itself, I mean, kind of a landscape lends itself better from an aspect ratio, wide aspect ratio that tends to work better over sofas and headboards and dining areas and so forth. And the color palette is again simple. So I could see it possibly working in an area where we've got, you know, blues and grays and maybe some black or darker tones. It would work well. But I also have post-processed things in different way to have a little bit of a different feel for a home environment. There's just a different palette of taste for people putting something in a home versus office or commercial space or lobby. And then it also just depends on the context of the situation. Is it the lobby of a hotel that's at Yellowstone Park and they, you know, want to emphasize things that are really happening in Yellowstone, then this might work. But if it's somebody's living room, it might be a little too realistic. We might need to um, kind of change the feel of it a little bit before it went out.
So speaking of that, can you kind of discuss what are some of the principles that you go by when you're trying to design a photograph for somebody to hang on their wall?
Sure. So I think, first of all, I tend to think of or imagine or look at pictures of real ones of any kind of room. I use that as inspiration. So you know, I don't care if it's a super frilly Victorian room or if it's an office that's very bold and contemporary, you know, maybe it's done in reds and blacks and, you know, grays and, you know, or multiple colors. But I try to think of the room, even if you're imagining it. I try to think of how it would look in a room, what size, what aspect ratio might work best, what other images also need to go in that room to complement it. Because one shot's cool, but if you have a client who needs six for a space, like you're not going to go put the bear and put the otter and put a rainbow and put all these other things in there. They don't go together. You have to have something that feels like a cohesive set of images, same color palette, same style, you know, same printed material that it's on. So I always try to think of rooms, and then I also try to think of when I'm shooting, what could I do with this? Like I'm going to pick a basic thing, a flower. Well, how many different ways could I shoot that flower? So I could get different aspect ratios, different sizes. Do I need to blow it up? Do I need to zoom in? Do I need to go macro? Do I need to do a field of them? Do I need to find other things near that flower that could be what I call my supporting actor photos if the flower is going to be the main actor? And you can see in the image behind me is that I have some main actor images, right, with the bigger picture of the cranes and then the picture of the reflection in the water. And then I've got some supporting actors that help tie all that in together, and those are important as well. But on their own, they wouldn't be, most of them wouldn't be any kind of contest winning picture. But you think about it with dinner, right? If I'm just going to use the, you know, steak and potatoes. Most people are a meat and potatoes kind of person, or if you're vegan, you know, something else in potatoes or what have you. But those are the main menu items. And then you fill in with, you know, vegetables or a salad or dessert or fruit or cranberry sauce or whatever it is. You need that in a room. And so you have to think about which things are, you know, using another analogy of a movie, the main actors and the supporting actors and the cast, so that everything comes together in concert to have a really nice grouping of images. Most designs today, you see people using groupings of things either together or sprinkled throughout the room. So that's why I try to think about that when I'm shooting is how many different ways can I shoot it? How many different ways can I use it? And what else can I do to have all of this go together?
Totally different way of thinking about things.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, go watch your HGTV shows or, you know, stations like that. Go look at what they're designing. Go look at the main pieces of artwork that they're using in the room and think about what you would shoot if you were to hang something on the wall in that room and how would it work in there. You know, and you can look up images all over online. Look at leaf through design magazines. And I think this ties back to the very first question we talked about was understand your market. And it's a very different situation than, you know, stock photography or calendars and magazines and competition. It's just completely different worlds. And I like to be bilingual. I like to speak that world, and I also like to speak this world.
Okay, good analogy. Obviously, these are trees and probably in the wintertime, but beyond that, I'm not sure what it is. That's the whole point. Huh?
Yeah, this is an abstract, and actually it's trees. It's shot out of camera as far as, the lines are concerned, but I actually inverted it and then I changed it to a monochromatic. So it gives that very, and I don't know if you want to blow it up a little bigger or not, Kirby, but it gives that very wintry feel because the leaves almost look like snow. And
Mm.
but yeah, I mean, it's a shot of silhouetted trees, and not a particularly enticing shot. I mean, I wouldn't take the original and put it in a magazine, but I love the way this turned out. It was very simple inversion in Photoshop, and then just simplifying the color palette, and it worked really, really well.
Yeah, it's very intriguing.
Yeah. But that's the kind of stuff that people want, things that are very easy on the eye. And if anybody's ever looked at, and I encourage people the next time you stay at hotels somewhere, go look at what's on the wall. You have to create things that are not appalling to people. And I don't just mean from a visual technical standpoint, but you're never going to see, I don't care what hotel it is, you're never going to see beautiful big pictures, no matter how amazing they are, of spiders on the wall in a hotel because most people can't stand them, right? And a
Right.
lot of people have a fear of birds. So things like this would work. People typically have a pleasing to, at worst, an inert reaction to trees. Most people don't find trees traumatizing. And so, they'll stick to things like trees and rocks and waterfalls and, things that create the right emotional state and don't evoke, fears like, you know, bears or, who knows what people are afraid of, dogs or whatnot, but they try to do things that are more inert for the general public.
So this is kind of started out as a traditional nature photo, but you've done some modifications here, it looks like.
Yes.
So talk
And
about how you approach this and why.
so yeah, this is this is actually an image that I use in a class that I teach on kind of thinking about nature photography differently. So I picked geese for a reason. I picked this picture for a reason because in the original raw image, it's kind of a soft blue background, nothing too exciting. They're flying. Um, there's nothing really super emotionally evocative about it. Uh, and I'm trying to teach people to see through to the potential of things. And so geese are not typically something that people find overly endearing or are passionate about. Some will, but many people are like, oh, it's a goose. They, like think of egrets or eagles or swans or, a quetzal or what have you. Those birds tend to have a lot more evocativeness to them. They're beautiful and graceful. Sandhill cranes are another good example. Geese are geese, and people identify with them differently. So I chose it because I wanted to showcase how you can create some emotion out of an image and create a softer feel and create a little more romantic feel, and also make this work for an interior space when the originals don't. And I go beyond just this picture to show how different cropping, different aspect ratios change it. And then, also if you were to composite and add some things over here that would just, give you a little bit more in the space to the left. And then the other thing that I talk about is so often camera clubs and different instructors will say, your birds, if you're in the US, your birds or your animals should face from, go from left to right in the image because that's how we read. And there's actually some research by Dan Hill, who wrote the book At First Blush. Fascinating speaker, world renowned, an amazing educator. And he talks about visual tracking, and he does a lot of research on eye movement and tracking in humans. And he says that is actually not the case.
Uh,
And to further illustrate that, this image, and I don't know if we have the one in the room or not, that you can display, but this image wouldn't work at all in a living room if the edge of the wall was right here and the whole rest of the living room was way over to the right. You need to flip it and have the birds fly into the living room. Or if the living room is over on the left and this is kind of an entryway into that living room, then it's going to be perfect to put just as it is. So when we do contests and competitions, so often we are looking at simply the image. Our eyes, our judges, nobody cares about what's 2 feet outside the image. Nobody cares about the coffee table that picture's sitting on or the wall that's sitting on. It just gets judged for the image itself. But when you start having to think about your photography, in a greater composition of the room with the furniture and the paint on the walls and the windows nearby and the entry and exit points and what focal point it is and what color the sofa is and whatever else, or an office space, different rules. And so now other rules start to apply and take over from where we learn. So it's just another example of different situation, different requirements.
This one's definitely fine art, I would say.
Yes. So this was my first gallery when I transitioned from traditional photography, where I'd print thousands of dollars worth and would sell hundreds of dollars worth. And this was the grand experiment, so to speak. So this gallery in Arizona, I had a good reputation there. They would invite me back. It's a juried gallery. You have to submit what you're going to, put out there. And granted, they make money either way by people walking through the door and buying tickets, or whether, they sell work. And of course, it's always a rev share, with almost always with a gallery, where you split the revenue and whatever the terms are agreed upon. So I did it, oh gosh, a few years ago now, as post pre-COVID and pre-cancer for me. So probably 2018. So I did this exhibit in 20, I think 17, and it was all traditional. And I sold a few pieces, but I brought home many, many more. And they were my best, beautifulest, award-winning published images. And they were all Arizona. It was an Arizona gallery. And I was so disappointed in the fact that, I got great attendance, but not many people bought. When I was invited to do it again, I'm like, I just can't afford to do that. That is just crazy. And so I really had harkened back to my design days when I was a floral designer, and thinking through all the things that I thought about. And this was really the series of images that was my aha moment of, I'm doing it wrong. And so I came up with this concept. I said, I thought about, what do people in Arizona decorate with? Well, a lot of people love the outdoors here and kind of the rugged desert feel. A lot of people decorate with sort of Western and Southwest kind of feel. So a lot of woods and natural tones and colors, very organic in a lot of homes today, anyway. And so I had reclaimed wood. I bought a ton of it. People were tearing down a building, a barn, a fence, whatever I could find. I acquired a lot of reclaimed wood. I also acquired different found elements from, this is a saguaro skeleton, a piece of it. You have to acquire those legally. There's some ways you can do it legally and definitely ways you can do it illegally. So I had to acquire those legally, but I took a piece of saguaro skeleton. I took this backdrop, finished it off, built the backdrop. That was a fun project with my dad and I. We've been woodworking for years. And I made this piece, did them in a very vintage style. I hand printed them on 300 GSM warm tone cotton rag paper. And then I hand printed them on a very kind of earthy, imperfect looking mulberry paper, hand deckled both pieces, put them in some leaded two-way glass frames, and then mounted them here. And these types of things that I did really sold well. I sold out of everything I had. I had to come back. It was a month-long exhibit. I had to come back and make a whole bunch of other stuff in between my road trips. And so this was really successful. And this is what really started me thinking in this direction of, I need to think about where these pieces are going, not just is it a pretty image or not. It needs to work in the overall design of a home or office. And that's what kind of set me off on this trajectory, and it's worked. So
A lot of work, but it worked apparently.
it did. It really, really did. Yeah. And it was fun. It was fun to do something outside the box.
You're a woman of many talents.
Well, I just have done a lot of different things over the years, and that combination thankfully has paid off. You don't realize at the time when you do these different things that they're going to come back 20, 30 years later and be a source of inspiration and skill. And that's why, people sometimes want tell me the steps that I need to do in order to be successful at photography. And I'm like, I can't because I don't know what your history is, and there's so many different things that have went into this being successful for me, and there will be plenty more in the future. And yes, I have made many mistakes, but many hours of really hard work. You'll never work harder than you do when you work for yourself. And I've worked pretty darn hard for other companies, but for me, it's been successful. But I think you have to have a good business mind. You have to set up your business well. The things you don't know how to do well, get experts to do. And that goes back to that contracting question you asked me. I do contract with an accountant to handle my books. I'm aware of what's going on and I check in regularly and can log into QuickBooks and, know what's going on. But having somebody that can navigate that for you and free you up so that you can do the other things you can do well is important. You can't do that right away because you don't have the funds to do it, right? You got to generate income in order to have those things. But as you get going, understanding where, time is so valuable. And when you can kind of outsource, if you will, or hire skill sets and do so in a way that still generates you money. You can't have an employee if they're not going to generate more money than you could do it on your own. But those kinds of things are things I think people really need to be aware of and set your business up well. Don't just, go and start selling something. Get yourself set up properly with a, LLC or Inc., depending on what your goals are. And, get the insurance that you need, get the legal help that you need to get it started, because there's nothing worse than being set up in the wrong way and then finding yourself in a hot mess legally or otherwise. So those would be my last little caveats.
So, what other resources are out there for people who want to start or develop a photography business?
Yeah. So I think the first resource is going to be you as the person. Um, Again, go back to understanding your market. What is it that you want to sell? And I will say this: most people I know who have ever just said, "Well, I'm going to start up a website and I'm going to put pictures on there to sell," it doesn't work. I mean, you might sell one or two, but people aren't going to just land on your website randomly and buy an image. It just doesn't work that way. What typically works is starting by building really good relationships with people. This is universal. I don't care if you're opening up an ice cream store, a bottle shop, a photography store, but start by really setting up yourself well with developing good, honest, and genuine relationships with people. They will be your advocates and they will start talking about you. And of course, it's got to be a win win relationship and a genuine one, but do that. Second of all, start again. I can't or overemphasize this. Understand your market. If people aren't going to want what you have, there's no sense spending thousands of dollars setting up a business and getting a website and all the other things you need to do. As dreamy as that can sound and as fun as that can feel the first time you get your business cards and your website, it all feels fun, but that is quickly, extinguished if it's not driving revenue for you. So I would say understand your market really well. And then again, get set up right. Get, even if it's just $100 every few months to have an accountant, and it costs usually more than that, but maybe you can just only afford that. Get an accountant to start out your books right. Have those things in place. Maybe do a basic, even if it's, some of the freeware that's out there. Set up a CRM, a customer resource management system, so you can track sales and track what you're doing and understand what's getting you revenue and what's not. And understand that a lot of business getting started is give and take, but don't, just because you're new, don't necessarily think free is the way to go for everything. Don't just give away your images for free just because. It has to be a win win. Credit alone does not pay the bills. And I know most people know that. So if you're donating an image because somebody wants to publish it in the local magazine, don't just get excited that they picked yours. That's great. They like that work. Now negotiate something. So I'm going to use this as an example, and I've done this before. Okay, yes, I would be happy to give you that image. I realize you may not have a big budget, but for this image or set of images, could you give me a half page ad in your magazine or a quarter page ad, or something else that is of value to you, because you're going to need that. And those kinds of things, everything doesn't have to be cash, but it does have to be a win-win. And the little byline at the bottom or the teeny tiny 8-point font with your name on it just is not going to get you anywhere. Very rarely. I do donate some of my images for, certain very specific charity work, but even then, there's usually some sort of give and take. And I just feel like, really truly understand. I can't say this enough, especially for women. Understand your worth and your value. And if you don't know, start working on that because you're going to need it. It's a tough, tough business. And I still make mistakes, but I've learned a lot. Be ready to do that. And again, just don't sell yourself short. Make a mistake once, but don't make it 2, 3 times and keep giving things away without it being of at least, fairly equal benefit for you. You're doing a business. This isn't, charity work. You're trying to make a business go, and it has to be a win-win for both people, or you're not going to want to do it, or they're not going to want to do it long term. So that's my advice.
Yeah, very good advice. So tell everyone where to find you and everything you do and your beautiful pictures.
Oh, thank you.
Images.
Yeah, so I'm actually in the process of developing a new website. So I'm kind of in both buckets at the moment to bring the bucket term back, but you can go to Langell, Langell photography.com. My name is Lisa Langell. And you can also go to Focus Your Art, all one word.com. And that's where I teach all my online classes and interactive remote classes. I do interactive feedback with everybody. And that's a newer company that I started about a year ago, but it's been going really well, and expect to see a lot more in the future with that and all my other in-person workshops, events, and all of that on my website. And you can always sign up to be in my newsletter and get notified of those things as well at langellphotography.com. Of course, I'm also on Facebook. Yeah, Lisa Langell or Langell Photography, and um, Instagram at Langell Photo. So hope to see you there and send me a note. I'd appreciate it.
Great. And I'll put all those in the show notes so people don't have to try to remember them or write them down.
Yes.
Well,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Lisa. It's been great. I've learned a lot, and you put a lot of information out there for people to absorb. So thank you
Well, I
very
hope it's
much for that.
helpful. You're so welcome, Kirby. It was a pleasure to talk with you, and a pleasure to hopefully help some of your followers out as well as they watch this podcast. There's a lot to learn in the business, but hopefully I've given a few good nuggets to get people started if they choose to do so.
Yes, indeed, you have.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day, Kirby. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it so much.
Thank you, and you too.
Thank you.
Each episode of Photographing West is published on the 15th and 30th of the month. If you enjoy these podcasts, please support them by using the affiliate links in the show notes the next time you buy camera gear or outdoor gear or anything else that's listed there. I get a small commission on each sale, and it doesn't cost you a penny more. Bye for now, and we'll be back on March 30th with an episode on whale photography with Diana McPherson. Look forward to getting together then. Bye for now.
Bye bye.